Hello and welcome to all of our young Padawan learners out there. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we begin our first book club podcast on this channel. Starting with Jedi Apprentice, because why not? In some ways this is the expanded universe novel series that began it all to an extent. There were other expanded universe books, but none that really went in depth on the Jedi or really paid much attention to the lore, as the Timothy Zahn and Children of the Jedi and other sequel era books seem to play so fast and loose with the lore, you can't call what they built up canon or even lore continuity, because they really had no respect for each other or even their own lore. And you'd find within the same novel about 6-7 contradictions of themselves. So this was a deep running problem with these books. The Kyle Katarn novels were some of the only ones that actually had lore, but they didn't seem to catch on like other expanded universe books did, sadly. But the Jedi Apprentice series really began to hammer out, okay, let's pay attention to lore and keep it faithful to what George Lucas wanted. So, in that regard, the Jude Watson book series were really a cut above a lot of the rest. So, and they kind of work great also as prequels to the various movies and as lead up, fleshing out the characters and their backstories and generally keeping the characters faithful to the movies and keeping the moral lessons of the movies, and you really see the moral values of the cultures they show and of the characters, in marked contrast to some books from the sequel era. The Vaughn era! Sorry. Had something in my throat. Must have been a Vaughn. Anyways. The first bit of chapter 1 of Jedi Apprentice starts with a blindfold battle. You never really see this in the sequel era. I know I'm taking pot shots at the sequel era books, but I mean, they're written brainlessly. I'm just gonna be honest.
The blindfold training battle
harkens back to episode 4,
and it is important because an initiate needs to learn how to feel the Force around it and trust it.
Yeah, they need to learn to trust in the Force around them, not just in themselves. And the trouble is, this is something the sequel novels never really touched upon. And when they did, they didn't really do it in a character-focused way. What I mean by that is, there was no real character development or real respect to the lore built up by episode 4, both the movie and the novel, and no real respect for the characterization that could happen during this process. That said, Obi-Wan's foe during this duel is Bruck Chun, a Telosian youth who's got anger and bitterness problems and who's very envious. And the thing is, he's very envious of Obi-Wan in particular and fears that Obi-Wan will take his spot in the lineup for a master. Obi-Wan, in turn, is an angry, bitter young man, because at this point he's on the cusp of adolescence. And the thing is, Obi-Wan has anger problems while Bruck can hold a grudge. And the thing is, Bruck is holding a grudge against Obi-Wan because a year prior, Obi-Wan tripped over Bruck accidentally, and this was caused by Obi-Wan's limbs growing faster than he could keep up, as often happens with young boys. The thing to bear in mind is that Obi-Wan will one day pretty much be about 6 feet tall, so he's not really able to keep up with his limbs. And this earned him the nickname Ophi-Wan, which Obi-Wan hates this nickname. Years later, though, Celia would continue to use it with him, but in a more affectionate way, so that Obi-Wan grew to adore his nickname of sorts. Or at least he found it almost funny and liked it when Celia called him that. But it was something that no other really called him. Because by the time he was a young man of about 17, he was the most graceful Jedi in the Order. Outside maybe Sealy. And maybe Mace. Because, like, you look at him and the way he moves in the movies, Obi-Wan is grace personified. Honestly, Qui-Gon in Episode 1 moves more clumsily than Obi-Wan. Anakin is a clumsy fool in comparison to Obi-Wan. But Obi-Wan does have the nickname Ophi-Wan. So as said, he obviously got himself a nickname he didn't like for a while, but then grew fond of. That said, as to Sealy, she was essentially the greatest lightsaber duelist in the Order after Mace Windu and maybe Yoda. So, eventually. Though sadly, she dies in the Clone Wars. Due to circumstances outside her control. Basically, she got killed off by the author. I had to word it that way because it's a very fitting way of describing it. That aside, Obi-Wan ends up kind of, bragging a little, and Yoda calls his bluff and has him and Brooke try to fight it out. Thinking, maybe I could fight it out of their systems. I'll get Brooke and Obi-Wan to vent all their anger until they're spent. What in the heck?
With someone who holds...
And he claims anger is the real enemy, is what Yoda tells him, which is a good lesson.
Yes, and sometimes to let it out of their systems can work, but because of these two, primarily Brooke Chun,
he could. There is a way to make Brooke and Obi-Wan come together,
but that's not the way.
They need someone with wisdom, and Yoda doesn't have any. So, yeah, you need someone completely different from Yoda to resolve this problem. And I'm harsh on Yoda because, well, how do I put it? He's a moron. Sorry, I hate to be the one to break it to anyone who's fond of Yoda from the movies, but everything that happens in Episode 3 can be pretty much laid at his doorstep. And I argue it's more his fault to an extent than almost Anakin, because Anakin came to him and said, yeah, I have an attachment, which, that's a no-no for a Jedi. And Yoda, rather than doing anything about it, told him, well, okay, here's my advice. If Anakin, yeah? How do I deal with the fear of loss? Just don't care. No, that is such a, what? But then again, Yoda should have probably reported Anakin and had him kicked out of the Order. Yeah, I know that might just accelerate the problem. But here's the thing. It would mean Anakin would lose all his security clearances and whatnot. Which means, can he actually gain access to the Chancellor formally as a Jedi? No. Now, it does mean the Chancellor might pounce on him. But if you banish Anakin to, say, Naboo, Palpatine will have a harder time getting to him because Palpatine's not going to leave Coruscant. So, and given that Palpatine's authority is restrained entirely to Coruscant, I'm just shooting an idea in the dark. But on the other hand, maybe the alternative was to actually put Anakin under house arrest for the duration of Yoda's stay on Kashyyyk. That way, Anakin's not allowed to go see Palpatine or Padme. Basically enforce the old rules again that Yoda used to love inflicting on people upon Anakin. But, he didn't want to. Favoritism. But the thing is, he informs... Anyways, rant aside, Yoda informs Obi-Wan of Qui-Gon's impending arrival, revealing to an extent that he knew of Brooke's little trick to keep this knowledge from Obi-Wan. And this is where Yoda... Now, Yoda has to have known Brooke was using every means possible to keep the information from Obi-Wan, along with all other Jedi arrivals. Yoda, it's only now that he's decided, you know what, right as Obi-Wan is 3 weeks from his 13th birthday, he goes, you know what, I'll throw the kid a bone. Yeah, I'll say this. The people complain about the Kaminoans being heartless. No. They're nicer than Yoda. And I say that because I'm just I just find Yoda a frustrating Jedi Master. He's someone who every stupid mistake you can make, he is committed to making. Because like the rule of 13 was never a rule before Yoda's time. That is purely Yoda's invention. It was not around in odan-urr's time, was not around in Exile's time and his order's time, like pre-New Sith Wars, wasn't around during the New Sith Wars. This is Yoda. This is his brainchild. And the problem is the way he sets up the Jedi Society is like the culture of the Jedi on Coruscant is almost a frightening thing. And I'll get to it why it's frightening in a minute. Jedi Master Docent is like the one who goes to tell Obi-Wan, yeah, you're going to be kicked off Coruscant because you beat up Brock. You know, Brock faked passing out. But the thing is, the Jedi could tell Brock was faking it. They just didn't care, and they decided, you know what, we'll punish Obi-Wan anyways. You have a liar in the Order and someone who's manipulated the truth and rumors. But they're like, we'll go along with it. Because Obi-Wan has made the mistake of believing the rumors that there are no Jedi coming to Coruscant. Here's the thing. If he can't see through the trick, he doesn't deserve to be a Jedi.
Does that mean the entire Order shouldn't be Jedi?
Yeah, but like Master Descent just doesn't give a rat's rear about Obi-Wan. Like the response of the coldness this Jedi responds to Obi-Wan with is like, wow.
There's something wrong with this Order.
Yeah, to an extent. But there's some... Like, this Order does a lot of good things. Like, Master Windu is an incredible guy. Mace Windu is incredible. Qui-Gon Jinn does have a heart. Although Qui-Gon, sometimes does a few heartless things to Obi-Wan in the Apprentice series. That aside, the thing is, this Order inherently is good. It's a force of good in the galaxy. No, like, the Jedi are. You look at Adi Gallia. Great gal. You got the Keldor Jedi. Plo Koon. He's a great guy. You look at Ki-Adi-Mundi. Deep down, Ki-Adi-Mundi's... I love Ki-Adi-Mundi.
Yoda may think he's doing the right thing.
But more often than not, he's not. Now, you've got... exhibited in all these chapters a lot of vices from a lot of Jedi. But on the other hand, you also have some good. Because you have Bant, for example, who's Obi-Wan's confidant. And she starts crying for Obi-Wan because she's really saddened to see him go and whatnot. And you have, speaking of vice, you have gluttony, which is shown with Reefed, who's just hilarious because he's a glutton who's just eating out of everyone else's plates and going, I don't mean to be greedy, or selfish, but are you going to eat that fruit or that piece of candy? Are you going to eat that? I just love him. He reminds me of Garfield, except not as psychotic as Garfield. Jaren Mullen is introduced, and he's going to play a very important role later on. He's actually a great character. We've got the rematch in Chapter 4 between Brock and Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan wins, but fights like a madman, which scares even Qui-Gon Jinn. And a few other Jedi were like, wow, he fights crazy. And he comments, maybe I could fix your style. But I'm not going to even touch that with a 10-foot long pole. I'm willing to touch Anakin with a 10-foot long pole when he's got 10 times the anger, but not you. Now, the thing is, I'm joking there. I'm joking, actually. Qui-Gon Jinn lays down some real, legit complaints here about Obi-Wan. He's like, you fight like a madman, and honestly, you scared me there. Which, I'm just saying, like, Qui-Gon is making some good arguments here. He's right.
And he is speaking from a bit of experience because of his previous Padawan, Xanatos.
Yeah, he's like, maybe no one can fix your anger problems, Obi-Wan. So maybe I shouldn't even try. And Obi-Wan then does something which completely floors Qui-Gon. Gets on his hands and knees and begs Qui-Gon to take him on as his Padawan. And Qui-Gon says, if I were to take you, you'd just turn. And you have Obi-Wan who then makes a vow he never breaks. He formally vows that he will never turn to the dark side. Sadly, that 13-year-old is going to grow up to be a broken old man rather than turn to the dark side. And I'm going to be honest, this moment perfectly describes and encapsulates the entire relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon lays down some rule or ruling, and Obi-Wan gets on his knees and tries to appeal to it and say, okay, I'll listen, I'll obey. And then Qui-Gon ends up using it to kind of break Obi-Wan. This is what happens in Secret of the Jedi when he reports Obi-Wan and Celia's love to Yoda. And ultimately, Obi-Wan becomes a hollowed shell of a man for the next few years. Obi-Wan was on the verge of the trials at 18. But then he basically just breaks down emotionally and just like becomes a robot. So that you get from Obi-Wan at 18, who loves people, to, have we found another pathetic life form? That guy. That is Qui-Gon Jinn's legacy to Obi-Wan. But on the other hand, you have Obi-Wan like, you know what? How about, no, I do love you, Qui-Gon. You're basically my father. And you have Qui-Gon, good, I'm going to replace you with this 9-year-old boy. And then Obi-Wan has to be the one to make the overtures and try to make peace with Qui-Gon. This is always a relationship. Qui-Gon, I mean no offense, in some ways is abusive. He doesn't mean to be. He's just thoughtless. And that's the thing. Obi-Wan has to keep trying to race to keep up. And sadly, I'll even say that Anakin kind of pays the price a little. But on the other hand, Obi-Wan ends up being in some ways abusive towards Anakin as a parent. But the trouble is, Obi-Wan learns this behavior from Qui-Gon Jinn. But I'm not saying Qui-Gon Jinn's a horrible character or person. Oh, no. He's a true hero.
He thinks he can save every individual person.
But he also thinks he's wiser than everyone. And it might sound weird, but maybe Obi-Wan should not have been Qui-Gon Jinn's Padawan. Maybe he should have been Tal's Padawan. Tal was Qui-Gon's lover of sorts and best friend throughout his life and soulmate. And Tal understood Obi-Wan on a level that Qui-Gon never did. She was essentially Obi-Wan's mom. And she treated and doted upon Obi-Wan like he was her son. And every argument Qui-Gon ever had with Tal, who did she always take the side of? Obi-Wan. And she was always scolding Qui-Gon and telling him, you need to treat that kid better and whatnot. She is ultimately a lot wiser than Qui-Gon. That aside, enough Qui-Gon bashing, because I don't want to bash him, because Qui-Gon Jinn is one of my favorite characters.
These characters have character flaws.
And that's the beauty of these characters. Now, Jinn, like I said, I'm just saying, this moment kind of encapsulates their entire life story, in a way. Qui-Gon says, you're not good enough. Obi-Wan gets on his knees and says, please, I just want to be good enough for you. And Qui-Gon says, no, you're not. This is kind of the relationship between the two. But on the other hand, Qui-Gon then makes a mistake, accidentally breaks Obi-Wan's heart, and then goes, ooh, what have I done? And you have Obi-Wan, who all but becomes a robot, and goes, nothing, Master. And you have Qui-Gon, what have I done? But deep down, Qui-Gon does love Obi-Wan. But it's just such a twisted relationship in some ways. But when you look at their background, and we'll analyze that in a moment, you'll understand why Qui-Gon is the way he is, and why Obi-Wan is the way he is. Qui-Gon's favorite room is the Star Map room, which is the same as Anakin's. Anakin loves the Star Map room. And Qui-Gon and Anakin both share the same interest of just popping on every planet that they could, so they proclaim, and loudly, at max volume, all the information about the planet and its societies and races. So that Qui-Gon likes to do this and finds peace in this chaos. Same with Anakin. This is a marked contrast to Obi-Wan, who likes to go to the Room of 1,000 Fountains to listen to the water and just meditate there, calmly and quietly. Or Obi-Wan tends to go to the training rooms with Mace or Celie and spend time with them there. The training rooms and the Room of 1,000 Fountains are the favorite places of Obi-Wan, at least later in life. And this is noteworthy. Now, it's the Room of 1,000 Fountains for Obi-Wan up until Celie's death, I noticed in the lore. Then it becomes the training rooms. But the training rooms are also a place Celie adored. But Bant preferred the Room of 1,000 Fountains, so that after Celie died, she cast such a long shadow, Obi-Wan never really goes to the Room of 1,000 Fountains and prefers the training halls, where Celie used to be, essentially chasing her shadow. Which, That's Obi-Wan in a nutshell to an extent. Always chasing Qui-Gon or Silly's shadows. Pulled between the two. Which, yeah. And I only mention Silly and Qui-Gon constantly because these are the two people who have the greatest impact on Obi-Wan's life. To a large extent, Obi-Wan's character revolves around these two characters far more than Anakin or Luke. And it is ultimately these two people who always either break him or make him what he is, sadly. Except eventually with Episode 3, because that's when Anakin completely breaks Obi-Wan. But that's a different can of worms. That said, and I only know that this is Anakin's favorite room because of Legacy of the Jedi, written by Jude Watson, where we get to see that Anakin really loves the Star Map room. And Obi-Wan's just flabbergasted as to why Qui-Gon and Anakin love turning on every planet and listening to this chaos until they just start sorting them all out. And Obi-Wan's like, how does that even work? It gives me a headache listening to this. But it's just a way Anakin and Qui-Gon tend to think. They're more creatures of chaos than of peace and serenity to an extent. With Qui-Gon wielding Form 4 and Anakin Form 5, so that both styles are fairly aggressive, offensive styles, whereas Obi-Wan was always more Form 3, defense. Then again, Celia was the greatest master of Form 5 in the Order, greater than Anakin. So, I think Obi-Wan's just attracted to the wielders of Form 4 and 5, because Obi-Wan was a wielder of Form 4 in Episode 1 and 2, and Qui-Gon was a master of Form 4, and Celia was a master of Form 4 and Form 5. So that's to bear in mind, guys and gals. That said, Yoda comes along to scold and reprimand Qui-Gon for not choosing Obi-Wan, and tells him, you were overly aggressive in your contest match when you were trying to impress your master, which was Dooku, as revealed in Legacy of the Jedi book. But Legacy of the Jedi reveals that it was Tall that Qui-Gon fought at 11 years old in that contest. The way Yoda talks, Qui-Gon got even more aggressive than Obi-Wan against Brooke. But get this. This was Qui-Gon pretty much against the girl he liked. And he got even more aggressive than Obi-Wan against Brooke when trying to impress Dooku. That's scary. Sorry, but Qui-Gon is like, I would never hurt Tall. Except for trying to get him Jedi Master. Wow.
And Yoda I know you mentioned that he is not wise, but he was actually wise to remind Qui-Gon of his faults when he was Obi-Wan's age.
Well, a little younger, yeah. Yoda, though, apparently wasn't present for the council meeting which assigned Qui-Gon his mission to Odan-urr. And that's something which I found was kind of interesting, because I say Yoda wasn't present for the meeting because he actually says, I wasn't aware you were headed for Odan-urr. And Qui-Gon says, I had a council meeting this morning about that. And Yoda says, okay, I didn't know. Because you guys have to bear in mind, Yoda is not present for every meeting. He's very, very busy. In this regard, I don't fault him. He is Grand Master. And so, he can't be present for every meeting. He essentially has divided his job between himself and Mace Windu. Mace Windu takes on the lion's share of the work, though. And because Mace Windu has this kind of Angevin-like energy. Mace Windu is like a force in motion all the time. To look at Yoda, it's not to look at power. With Mace, it's like looking at Revan as Kreia would describe it. It's just you're looking into the very face of power. In a lot of ways, Mace was more powerful than Yoda. Not Yoda, but Palpatine or Anakin or something, in some ways. Just that force of personality and whatnot. That said, there is something Yoda says that's interesting. Study the stars you may, Qui-Gon, Yoda said as he left. They have much to teach you, but will it be what you need to learn? Where Yoda's very harsh with him. That said, the reason I'm harsh with Yoda is you look at this society of these initiates. The idea is that they must compete for a small pool of Jedi Knights and Masters. The initiates are all between the ages of 10 and 13, fearful that they might commit the ultimate sin of turning 13. And Yoda, contrary to every other generation of Jedi, has forbidden Masters from having more than one Padawan. In an effort to constrain the numbers. reason I say he's constraining the numbers is that he's fearful that if the Jedi grow to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of members, then there will inevitably come an Exar Kun or Revan who will turn a portion of the Order to the dark side. Certainly that's possible. But we have to bear in mind that the way he is raising these people, it's inevitable one of them will turn. But on the other hand, even with constraining his numbers, Dooku turned, Xanatos turned. The thing is, his attempt to restrain the numbers has not worked. On the other hand, it has caused so much anger and fear and jealousy amongst the younger generation that the dark side is spoiled for choice. You look at Lorian Nod and Dooku. Lorian Nod tasted the dark side, but Lorian Nod could have been saved, but he was kicked out due to the rule of 13, essentially, and because the Jedi played favorites with Dooku. Dooku was fearful and despised his fellow Padawans and initiates. Xanatos Kreia never had to fear, but tended to lord it over the other initiates who were envious of him and felt worthless compared to him. At least that's what's implied in the Jedi Apprentice books. Qui-Gon Jinn was overly excited to become Dooku's apprentice, little knowing that his master would hate him and abuse him, as implied in all the Jedi Apprentice books that actually get into the Qui-Gon Dooku relationship. Trust me, I know some people want to believe that Dooku loved Qui-Gon. Oh no, he hated his Padawan. He had nothing but contempt for Qui-Gon Jinn. So the problem is that these kids are raised in fierce competition for a small pool of masters, where the orders built by odan-urr, and even odan-urr's predecessors, and the Jedi Exile, would allow masters to have between 3 and 6 Padawan learners. Yoda's order restrains it to 1, to restrain the numbers. This causes jealousy, anger, gluttony, and whatnot to become rampant.
Yoda inadvertently set up a Lord of the Flies situation.
Oh, I'm actually going to propose it's advertent. Yoda meant to do this. The idea is survival of the fittest. Only the strongest will be chosen, while the rest are tossed out to the Agricorp. But the trouble is, a lot of those tossed out to the Agricorp, as revealed in a lot of comics and expanded lore books, it seems, and in a lot of RPG sessions, from what I've observed, seems like a lot of people have caught on to this. A lot of these initiates either end up in various Jedi cults or Sith cults. And this... Now, the attempt to restrain light side numbers is counterbalanced by the toleration of the Dathomir witches, who number probably in the millions, and they're all Darksiders. Yoda is evidently mismanaging this problem. He's turning a blind eye to the dark side, whilst restraining the light side's numbers, and keeping the light side from fighting with the dark side. On the other hand, he's restraining the numbers of Padawans, and the Padawans that do make it through are, well, arrogant, because, like, hey, I made it through, you didn't. They're angry, they're bitter, and they've lived their entire lives full of fear that they aren't good enough, which breeds various personality defects. You look at, and this is why, for example, Qui-Gon Jinn is such a damaged individual. He had an abusive master, very abusive, and he had grown up fearful and angry. Obi-Wan was much the same way.
There's a reason why many initiates were jealous of Anakin.
Yeah, but they also tried to understand and be friendly with Anakin, but Anakin felt himself to be better than them, which was a problem. That said, you had others who were incredibly arrogant when young, Ferris Olin, and then when Ferris Olin was thrust into the real world, he quickly became a champ. I love Ferris as a character. But the thing is, you look at, for example, Bant. She's a complete basket case when it comes time for her to almost turn 13. She's utterly broken. I can't think of a single scene where she's not crying and whining for Tal. And she later ends up apprenticed under Keith Fisto. Now, if your master dies and you don't find yourself a master, I think within a month or two, you're kicked out. Doesn't matter if you're 20 or 22. But if you're 20 or 22, you could try proposing a shot at the trials, but then it comes down to a controversial council decision. And it's controversial because the council is more likely to say no, which will mean you're booted out. So the problem is Yoda's doing everything in his power to limit the number of Jedi. This does not actually mean that he's getting more quality Jedi. Actually, the quality of the Jedi is decreasing. The Jedi seem to be less and less skilled and powerful. Although in the generation right before the Clone Wars, this is starting to reverse. Because you get Jedi like Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Silly Tachi. These are very, very powerful, talented Jedi. But before that generation, or these two generations, for the past 900 years, the Jedi have been weakening and withering on the vine. So you have a problem that there are more Darksiders in the galaxy. There's the Jedi that are coming out are more flawed creatures and broken ones. And what's more is that Yoda's orders spies on every moment of these kids, so that every word is monitored, and a single cross word about Yoda or the Council results in being kicked out. Any kind of racist terminology and whatnot results in you being kicked out. Turning 13 results in being kicked out. Speaking of stealing a holocron, and actually stealing a holocron, you're kicked out. If you access some of the archives, even Jedi holocrons that you're not allowed to, you're kicked out. If the list of rules goes on and on. You have to stay within the temple, otherwise you're kicked out. The amount of rules in place makes it so that it's suffocating. You're not allowed to do anything without the say of the masters. But if you spread rumors or hide gossip from other apprentices and seek to murder another apprentice, you're not kicked out. You're actually elevated in rank. This is essentially the ideal society in Thal Sinestro from Green Lantern Corps' eyes. It would probably be the sort of society that Palpatine would approve of, because
Had they decided to kick out Brook Chun instead of Obi-Wan,
well,
I'd understand.
I'd actually object to it as well.
I'd object to it
because
too.
later they end up doing that. And Brock turns to the dark side.
I know, but I'm discussing the entire matter of them wanting to kick out Obi-Wan over the deception that Brook Chun used.
Yeah, I agree. But on the other hand,
Sending
Brock's entire personality problems is the fault of Yoda not dealing with problems. Having a laissez-faire attitude towards these kids and saying the more violent they get with each other, the better. This is Yoda's fault. He should take the situation in hand and actually, try counseling them and trying to restore peace. But the thing is, to Yoda's mind, you even look at Lorian Nod and Dooku trying to actively murder each other at 13 years old. Yoda's reaction is basically, kids, this is normal. To an extent, well, actually, he doesn't say it's normal. He's like, it's wrong of Dooku to have done that. It's wrong of Lorian to have done that. But you know what? We'll kick one of them out and keep the other. Even though Dooku struck first and Dooku was the one trying to murder. Yoda saw it as, well, we should keep Dooku. No. He tried to murder another kid. Brock Chun doing basically all but trying to do the same to Obi-Wan. He turns a blind eye. The thing is, Yoda, heck, he knows Xanatos Kreia is turning to the dark side in the backstory of Xanatos and Qui-Gon. But he does not say we got to do something about Xanatos. Instead, he turns a blind eye. So when there is someone turning to the dark side, Yoda turns a blind eye.
Yoda should not have been Grand Master. There are probably other roles that he could have done a lot more good in.
Yeah, and we only complain about Yoda because his shadow looms over the initiates.
He's good with younglings.
Yeah. Now, that said, he's not good with anything else. He should have been a teacher, and he should have removed that rule of 13 and that no attachment rule that he invented, and I do say he invented. Now, the Jedi originally did have rules about attachment. Basically, you were not allowed to fall in love without the permission of the council. But then when you did, you had to consult with the council for permission. And there were characters who were allowed to marry, like the two Cathar who were apprentices to Arca Jeth in the Exar Kun era. Those two had a special dispensation that allowed the two to be married. So if you actually said, all right, I fall in love with this person, do I have permission to start a family, to marry and start a family. The council would then debate it. And sometimes they'd just say, we want you to wait a good 5 years. Other times they'd say, no. But then usually, from what I've observed in the old Republic lore, what did they more often than not say? Sure. So that Yoda just saying, no, it's all forbidden. And then Yoda, like you look at the scene where he tries to, him and Qui-Gon destroy Obi-Wan in Secrets of the Jedi. Yoda's taking a certain sadistic pleasure in it. And it's, like, Yoda's just like, no, I'm going to tear this apart. Now, I don't like a lot of the post-2006 books, but when he tries to get Obi-Wan to destroy the Padme-Anakin relationship by breaking Padme as a person, it's a very sick scene, and he's like, yeah, no, I want you to do it, Obi-Wan. I don't feel comfortable with that. No, you're going to do it, please. Let's do it. It's just, Yoda does not, like, his antipathy towards attachments is almost frightening. But the thing is, Yoda is at his core a good person. He's just very, very dumb. And I say that out of love for the character, but the thing is, he
doesn't understand interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And maybe this has to do with his age. He forgot what it was like to be a youngling.
Yeah. Well, you got to bear in mind, when he was a youngling, there was no Jedi Order.
I know.
But yeah, like, he does not understand interpersonal relationships, and he really doesn't understand kids to an extent. Because, you look at these kids, there is not a single child outside of Band who is not angry or throwing insults at each other. Except for those within the same clique. Like, Jaren, Obi-Wan, Bant, and Reeft are one clique. Alto and Bruck are one clique. Like, every Jedi generation in this period has cliques. And from what Mace mentions in his Harun Cal novel in the Clone Wars, he didn't have cliques. He was a loner. Did many initiates actually like him? No. He was alone. And Mace does hint that he was a very lonely young boy. And Yoda chose him as his own Padawan learner, but that just made Mace even lonelier, in a way. Now, Mace took pride in it because, I'm Yoda's Padawan. I'm his greatest Padawan learner ever. But that set him apart. So, Yoda's just a very peculiar Jedi Master. When you compare how he treated his order, like, you look at the way odan-urr treated his. We have to compare the two. They both lived for about 1,000 years, and they both, ruled over long-standing Jedi orders. Odan-urr was very loving, respectful, and even teased Nomi Sunrider a little about, like, this relationship or that relationship. And he was very fond of her daughter. Like, his reaction to a Jedi coming in at 40 years old and having a daughter was one of shrug. Well, her daughter is adorable. And he acted like a grandpa. And he was just like, oh, yeah, he teased Nomi. He was fond of her daughter. He just treated everyone like his grandkids. And he was like, oh, love's natural. It's okay. His attitude was one of far more acceptance and affection towards his order. Yoda, there's something almost reptilian where he's just observing them constantly. And the problem is, you have, like, Mace, for example, at the end of one chapter in Jedi Apprentice says, so we have a fool and a liar. Okay. Mace is like, kick them both out. Punish them equally. Which I kind of get. It's like, let's just punish them both. Yoda sees us, no, let's have them fight one last time to impress Qui-Gon Jinn. I feel in the Force that this has to happen. Yeah, Mace. That's dumb. Whatever. Fine. Not my problem. Initiates are your problem. But I think that this is in a way irresponsible on Mace Windu's part. Because Mace, I actually think he should maybe take over responsibility over the initiates. Because if he did, I think he'd see how twisted and perverted they're becoming. And what is he... Because the thing is, these initiates arrive at 13 years old. And given how you have Qui-Gon with one romantic relationship, Obi-Wan with one, Anakin with one, or a couple, the thing is, romantic relationships, it seems to be becoming more and more common with each passing generation. And the trouble that Yoda is having is that he keeps breaking these couples up. Sometimes they end up, like, yeah, these relationships blow up. But the thing is, Yoda, these Padawans need an outlet. Emotionally, they've been they're so repressed. They have nothing but anger and bitterness. so that the first emotion, positive emotion they come across, love, they cling to, but then it becomes so obvious that Yoda has to go in and neuter this relationship. And then what's left are basically empty robots, just there to fulfill their Jedi duties.
That even some of the masters that are opposed to attachment, they're like, this isn't the way to handle this matter.
Yeah, there's a lot of Jedi who start talking about how maybe the no attachment rule needs to be thrown out. You look at Celia, you look at Obi-Wan, they talk about it. Even Qui-Gon Jinn mentions that maybe the rule should be repealed. There's a lot to unpack in these couple of chapters in terms of lore that it at least hints at. But anyways, tell us what you think of this video and of these chapters. Doubtless there's going to be a lot of people who dislike this video for our kind of Yoda bashing. But it needs to be said, because really the one who handed the keys of the kingdom to Palpatine was not Mace Windu, was not Obi-Wan, was not, I would argue, to an extent, even Anakin. It was Yoda. It's Yoda who led the Jedi to that precipice and off that cliff. And it's not that I hate the character. I actually really like the character. But the problem is, but there's something dystopian about the Initiate's society and how their lives are shaped, so that it really strongly reminds me of the clones. And it's funny because I think this is why the Clone Army and the Jedi got along so famously, is because they come from the same background. The only people in the galaxy who could understand a Jedi Knight or a Jedi Apprentice is a clone. Anyways, tell us what you think, and don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button.